Good afternoon, good morning, good night, good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining GSBI Speaks. We do this program monthly and we try to come up with timely topics on soil biodiversity. And when you want to know more about previous sessions, you can visit our website of GSBI, and there you can see all the meetings and the presentations. That also means that these presentations are being recorded, so you're warned for that. If you have questions, you can ask these questions in the Q&A, and then they will be picked up and addressed at the end of the introductions. First, I would like to show the speakers that we have gathered today. The first is Ronald Vargas from FAO. Maybe you can show yourself, Ronald. Hello.
Hi, Wim, thank you.
Hi, Ronald, good to see you. The second speaker of today actually is the first speaker, sorry, it is Luca Montanarella. He's from the European Commission.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Hello, Luca.
Hello.
Then the third speaker is Diana Wall of GSBI.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Diana. And the fourth speaker will be Carlos Guerra from Soil IDIF in Germany.
Hello.
Hello. So I will start with an introduction to the theme. And so you can switch off the camera, Ronald. Okay, so if everything is fine, you can see my screen. If I don't get something from Monica, then I'm starting.
Looks good.
So, yeah, okay, thank you. So today it's about towards a global soil biodiversity observatory. And I will introduce the theme to you briefly. All the introductions will be about 10 minutes, and then we will just have ample time for discussions and questions and answers. So the first thing actually to, the first question to ask is, what do we aim for? And what we are aiming for, is that not too early? So we aim for a global soil biodiversity observatory. And what we do this while only 1% of the soil biodiversity is described, as we can estimate. We also do this while policymakers struggle to incorporate soil biodiversity into their policies. So we also do this while we know that no hunger trades off negatively with sustainable soil practices. We also do this while we know it takes ages to determine all soil biodiversity from a soil sample. And we know that soil sampling is also notoriously problematic, and so is the standardization of protocols. So, well, you should have a lot of courage while we have so much uncertainties to start with the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. However, there's also hope. And I would like to make the comparison with the glass of water, which can be half full or half empty. But we can also say the soil core is half full. And actually, if we don't speak out as a soil and soil biodiversity community, then we will never be heard by the ones who make policy. So this is really important to tell the world what we know. And we know a lot. And if you have taken track of the literature, you have seen many papers coming or becoming published on global fungal diversity, atlas of the dominant bacteria, global nematode diversity, earthworm surveys, columbulant species worldwide, and there are many other papers like this. So ecologists have started to try to publish information on soil biodiversity worldwide. So when you're just like here in the middle, you're a soil ecologist, one other thing to be aware of also is that there is a lot of activities going around. So you have national activities like the soil grid sampling in France or the Dutch soil survey data. But there's not only that, there is also Soil Biodiversity Observatory network. We have the Lucas soil sampling. Now there's an international network on soil biodiversity assessment, which has been launched. But we also have IPBES, we have the Global Soil Partnership, we have the European Commission that has adopted or started to adopt the EU soil strategy. We have the Convention on Biological Diversity. So just around us, there is a lot of activities going on that helps and makes our data or your data trickle up into strategies, into policy, national, regional, global. And so today we are going to get some presentations from the various colleagues that have shown themselves already, which also can help you to know how your data are going to be taken up by policymakers. So the first speaker of today will be Luca Montanarella, and he will speak about policies, EU policies, global policies. The second speaker is Ronald Vargas. He will bring us towards the global network of soil biodiversity observatories. Then Diana Wall will give the perspective from GSBI and what role GSBI plays. And Carlos Guerra will bring us also to developing countries and from a soil bond perspective. So this is my introduction. Let's quickly move on to the speakers of today. So Luca, can I invite you to start sharing your screen?
Sure, and thanks for the introduction, Wim. I hope everybody can hear me and can listen to me and can see my screen. So welcome again to this session. Welcome again to this seminar. As was introduced by Wim, I will be very briefly introducing from the European Commission point of view perspectives and from the work I'm doing at the Joint Research Center, which is the science policy interface of the Commission, where we are working within a team on soil-related issues, how we have been getting to the stage of contributing to the establishment of such a global soil biodiversity observatory. So let me move first to briefly introduce the context. Soils are a very much cross-cutting issue. And being a cross-cutting issue means that there are many different policy areas that are relevant to soils. That's why actually you have quite a difficulty in having a coherent policy approach, because different policy perspectives, different policy contexts are addressing soils from a different angle. Certainly, food security is at the core of our concerns concerning soils, because soils are the basis of our food production. You may know that roughly 95%, according to FAO, of all our food is coming from soil-related production systems, mainly agricultural systems. But of course, soils are emerging as a very important topic also within other contexts, like, for example, climate change. You may know that soils are a major carbon sink, and therefore soils are very relevant to the discussions around how to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. Soils are obviously very relevant also to the desertification and to desertification and land degradation related issues. And that's why soils at the very end are a cross-cutting issue across the various global multilateral environmental agreement, like the Climate Change Convention, the Desertification Convention, and certainly also, and this is the topic of today, the Biodiversity Convention. This because soils are holding a very large pool of biodiversity. Much of the biodiversity, by the way, is little known, and as was just mentioned by Wim, still needs to be fully documented and fully described also in taxonomic terms. Let me move on. Sorry. some years ago, actually, and there certainly my colleague Ronald Vargas will tell you more, some years ago in 2011, we supported very much the establishment of a common framework that would put all this together into a common approach. And this is the Global Soil Partnership that is very much also at the core of what we are trying to do now concerning the establishment of a Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. So the Global Soil Partnership had and has still the ambition to be the connecting platform for addressing soils in a coherent way across the various policy areas that are relevant to soils. Now, let me talk also a little bit about what we as Commission have been doing on this topic. We started dealing with soil biodiversity actually in the early years of this century. We started dealing with it, particularly in preparation of the International Year of Biodiversity 2010, where we compiled the first European Atlas of Soil Biodiversity that was presented as a contribution of the Commission to the International Year, and also was presented to the Common Conference of the Parties of the CBD, of the Convention for Biodiversity in Nagoya. That was the starting point, actually, of understanding the biodiversity existing in European soils, but it was also triggering a number of other initiatives that have been then leading to many of the things that we are discussing today in this webinar. One of the things that came after the publication of that atlas was the founding of the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative. I'm sure that later on Diana will tell you all the details about that. The Commission was one of the founding organizations of that initiative that we think should be at the core of what we are doing concerning global soil biodiversity, and particularly should and is contributing quite importantly to this new idea of a Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. Out of that also, then we developed a global approach to assessing soil biodiversity at global scale. And actually that was the work that, with the help of the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative and many, many colleagues across all the continents in the world, has been leading to the publication in 2016 of the first Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas, as a publication of the European Commission, but with the contribution of many of you, also many of you that are currently online and following this webinar. It was a huge collaborative effort all over the world in order to have a common understanding of the global soil biodiversity pool, and also an understanding of what needs to be done in order to protect it and to further understand it. Now, that has triggered a number of initiatives, including the need to have a higher level assessment of the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity. To that assessment, led by FAO, has been contributing many people and was released then in 2020, the report that you can download from the website of FAO, which is actually a reference for what we are trying to do now, establishing the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. It's a reference because that report triggered a report by the Scientific Committee of the Biodiversity Convention that has been recommending to establish a global capacity building program for the use and management of soil biodiversity, and particularly has been recommending the establishment of a Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. Of course, that's an important type of recommendation that's of course, is building the basis then for further action from the side of the various stakeholders. Following that, we had a quite important year last year, 2021, because FAO hosted in Rome, actually online as a virtual event due to the current pandemic situation, the first global symposium on soil biodiversity. That was a really turning point, because out of that symposium, which was open to everybody and where all the various stakeholders have been very actively participating, came out an outcome document that includes several quite important recommendations to policymakers, but also in general to all the various stakeholders. And one of the recommendations, actually the first one, is to establish a Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. That recommendation is of course quite relevant, and it was immediately taken up by several stakeholders and policymakers, particularly in the same year, in July, the European Parliament has been releasing adopted a report in which it was calling on the Commission to support the establishment of a global capacity building program for the use and management of soil biodiversity and of the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. So having the European Parliament recommending us to do something, the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory was further elaborated and inserted also in the more recent document from the side of the European Commission, which is, and has been just mentioned also by Wim in the introduction, which is our new EU soil strategy for 2030. As you know, as you may know, the European Commission has presented on the 17th of November last year a new strategy. We already had one which was a little bit outdated, presented in 2006. In this new strategy, which has a target for 2030, we have outlined the various actions that the Commission is planning to do in the next years in order to achieve sustainable soil management in the European Union, but also taking responsibility for what we do at global scale as well. I will not go through all the actions, of course, but just concerning the planned actions addressing soil biodiversity, the Commission is planning to demonstrate its global leading role in building knowledge on soil biodiversity, and that's by publishing in this year a first assessment of EU soil biodiversity and several other activities that are related to that. But most importantly, I would like to mention that in the official final document of the soil strategy, we have expressively mentioned that we intend to step up efforts in mapping, assessing, protecting, and restoring soil biodiversity and support the establishment of a global soil biodiversity observatory, as proposed by the Food and Agriculture Organization within the Global Soil Partnership. So that's the, let's say, the policy, the recommendation and the basis for our further action, because out of this recommendation, we would like now to make a move forward and see how we can concretely contribute and help in establishing such an observatory. Of course, we offer what we know, and so you may know that last year we also introduced and established the EU Soil Observatory, so the European Union Soil Observatory, and actually we offer that as a model, as a potential model for how such an observatory may function and look like. For us, a soil observatory in the EU is essentially strengthening what we were already doing over the last 20 years, which is the collection of data in a harmonized way across the European Union, has available already since a long time from the European Soil Data Center. To strengthen that data flow, of course, the first crucial element is to have a stronger and more structured EU-wide soil monitoring system. And so a soil monitoring system is the basis for any observatory. And this, in our view, should be also the basis for our discussions on how to organize a global soil biodiversity observatory. The second element is, of course, that data are not sufficient to help and to steer what is happening on soils from the policymaking side. You need to translate this data into indicators that are relevant for the various decisions to be taken on the land management, on the soil management practices. So you need a dashboard of indicators that is monitoring how we are doing concerning soil-related policies, how are we doing in implementing what we are planning to do, and how this is really reflected then in a positive outcome concerning the properties and the condition of soils in Europe. And of course, in the case of the Global Observatory at global scale. We also think an observatory should keep a window open and should continue to support top-level research. I think, and we think that research and innovation in an observatory has a role to play, because we need to be at the forefront of the scientific knowledge. An observatory must be based on the most updated scientific knowledge, and that's why support to research and innovation is an important goal of the European Soil Observatory. And finally, let me mention something that we consider quite crucial. We cannot do monitoring, we cannot have an observatory if we don't have an open platform for discussing what we monitor and what we measure with all stakeholders. And that's why an open stakeholder forum that we call the European Soil Forum is crucial to us in order to assure that everybody is on board, that everybody has the possibility to express his vision concerning how we should operate such an observatory at EU scale. And we think that that could be a successful model also to be replicated at global scale. But this, of course, needs to be further discussed. And hopefully also this webinar will allow such a discussion. So thanks again for your attention. And I'm more than happy to reply to any questions later on or to further discuss all this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. In the Netherlands, we have a saying that Aachen and Cologne have not been built on the same day. And I think that you have nicely explained how much time it takes to get everything in place to have a good soil strategy and then to roll it out. So you mentioned 2 decades. It's very enlightening for everybody, I think, to see how policy works. So how much it takes time to go from your soil core up to Brussels or Washington or Rome or wherever. Thank you. So the next speaker is Ronald Vargas, and he is from Rome, from FAO, and he will bring us into the Global Observatory.
Thank you very much, Wing. I will, well, Luca basically explained most of the things that I was going to say, so it's easier now. I will try to focus on some details about what we are trying to do together. So basically, we are aiming to establish this Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory in order to contribute to address the global challenges that we are facing. I know that here we are in the community with soil biodiversity experts, and biodiversity loss is one of those great challenges we are currently facing. However, there are many others, and all of them are interconnected, and they are interconnected through one interface, which is soils. And we are firmly sure that healthy soils, of course, with a lot of biodiversity, can contribute to address these challenges so that we keep ensuring the provision of key ecosystem services that are fundamental for life on Earth. That is really what it motivates us all. But something very important that we are trying to inform the different venues, and particularly the decision makers, because when talking about the biodiversity loss, we tend, and especially general public, tend to talk about what we can see. But we fundamentally forget about what is below our feet, and that's the biodiversity in our soil. So we are trying to make it very clear that the two cannot be separated and should be addressed together. Otherwise, we are really not addressing the biodiversity loss. So that is something that we want to highlight, because there is a lot of, let's say, concern about the biodiversity loss. But we are forgetting a fundamental piece, that is soils, soil biodiversity. And currently, we are facing one big challenge in our sector, which is that soils are getting degraded. And that, of course, has an impact not only on soil biodiversity, but on the overall soil health. A lot of, let's say, work has been done already in soil biodiversity, and we have been trying to position soil biodiversity in the global agenda, and we were not the first ones to do this. In 2002, the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity was established under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and some work has been done. However, it didn't reach the level in which soil biodiversity could be considered. Luckily, there has been a number of initiatives coming up, and Luca already mentioned most of them, that brought soil biodiversity again and give it an impulse that now soil biodiversity is considered an important piece. But we didn't reach the limit, because there is still a lot of work to be done in order to really make soil biodiversity, a very important piece of all the policy developments and actions globally. We have been doing some work. Luca mentioned most of it, and I believe that now we have the basis for moving forward so that research is strength, more investment is there, but also that all countries around the world can be working on soil biodiversity, not only to understand what they have in terms of biodiversity there, but in using soil biodiversity as a nature-based solution for all the challenges that we are all facing. Joining forces is crucial for making soil biodiversity a very important aspect to be a solution for the global challenges that I mentioned before. And for this, we have established this international network on soil biodiversity, bringing along and together all the ongoing initiatives and experts that are working in this important field. They become the technical forum, the human talent that will make possible the establishment and running of the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. Otherwise, without you, without all these people and initiatives, this will not be possible. Because what we are aiming to do is to monitor and forecast the condition of our soil biodiversity and soil health globally. And for doing that, of course, we need to measure. We cannot just rely on proxies or on all data. We need to start measuring. That's an observatory. And for this, we need to involve everyone, not only the research community, but we need to bring along also countries, because they have to understand that measuring and trying to understand the condition of soils and soil biodiversity is fundamental for the decision making, for developing policies, actions, etc. And this is all about. Now the network of soil biodiversity is really growing, and we have many active participants in terms of institutions and people. We have working groups for different aspects that are fundamental in order to address soil biodiversity, from measuring, monitoring, but also till the time we reach policies, till the time we can use soil biodiversity in terms of good practices to address the challenges. We are currently in the design on how the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory should look like, what they should be doing, how the governance, the components, etc. And for doing this, we of course need you all, because as I said, we are really facilitating this process, and we want to bring all these initiatives and experts to contribute to this very important observatory, because we will be focusing on the observation. We need to measure, as I said, we need to have common methodologies so that everything that we do is harmonized and we have protocols, etc., so that while the data and information that we will be giving to the decision makers is really harmonized, compatible between regions, countries, etc., and that will help us to monitor and forecast the earth soil's condition. We also need to show the value of biodiversity and make available good practices for addressing not only food security issues related to agriculture, but also bioremediation, etc. And we should definitely influence policy development, because that's when we will see results. Otherwise, it will be just we talking to each other without having an impact. That is why I would like to invite you all to join the International Network of Soil Biodiversity and contribute to the establishment and full implementation of the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory. I want to thank the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative, Diana, Wim, and all colleagues who made this possible, this webinar. And I really want to invite all of you to join us so that we can make a difference when it comes to soil biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for this very nice introduction to this ambitious program. We are getting questions ready in the Q&A, so don't hesitate to put your questions in. And the next speaker will be Diana Wall from the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative. Diana, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much, Ronald. I always enjoy your presentations, and Luca to help set the stage. I want to explain why we have the GSBI and how I hope that we can contribute. A little bit of knowledge right now is that we are facing so many challenges. And I saw this report, pardon me, that just came out by the International Science Council. And they were looking at the same thing we're looking. How do we get the information to address what is happening in food, water, our human health, urban areas and natural areas, and climate and energy? And they have come up with those 5 targets and said that there are barriers now that are existing that are stopping science from really coming together to address these issues. And I think soils fit in there in soil biodiversity. Soils are also, and soil biodiversity in particular, is highly fragmented. We have scientists who study a single organism for their whole career and an interaction with what it feeds on in soil. And there are many different types of predator-prey interactions, trophic interactions, many species, but we also have geochemists, biogeochemists who look at nutrients, who connect the whole ecosystem above and below ground. And it's getting those people who are already interested in soil biodiversity and how it connects above ground, below ground, and what it does, that is really going to be important to meet these urgent challenges. So all of our science is from many disciplines, and we're really lucky to have it. But the second thing is they pointed out, and this is a number of challenges that they listed, that the scale of global change issues, the challenges, particularly biodiversity and climate change, has to have more scientific funding and infrastructure. And I think we've seen some of the ways this happens from Luca and Ronald's discussions. So why the GSBI? As mentioned, it started in 2011. A bunch of scientists got together. We said we need to pull this information. We know a lot already in 2011 to help as we're moving forward to address these challenges. And so the GSBI is just kind of a cornerstone that kind of talks with people, unites different disciplines, supports new ideas, tries to make connections. And we're volunteer scientists. We've got, we think, more than 4,000 members, but with volunteers, we don't have a way to count them so far. There's no dues, but we do feel that we need to speak for this interconnecting complex interaction of all these species below ground. Who are we talking about? Many of you have seen this picture. We've got at least, the estimates aren't great, but at least a quarter of diversity is estimated to be below ground in soils. And as you can see, it's animals, plants, and behind each one of these boxes, they're doing something in an ecosystem. Whether it's the fungi, the bacteria, the mycorrhizal networks, the columbella, the mites, and going on up to huge earthworms, and huge to me because I study nematodes, but going up to huge animals. How are they all connected? Where are the taxonomists, the species people? How do we resolve molecular and taxonomic and functional, what they do in soils? So these are big issues, and there's data on this, and we think it can be helpful. So the GSBI is trying to be a link between what we know, the knowledge on soil biodiversity as key regulators of ecosystem processes that give us these ecosystem services we're dependent on. And it's just a point here to say that soil biodiversity knowledge has really accelerated. It's just tremendous, both the technologies, the number of people, the interest, and it's good because, as I keep mentioning, we've got an urgency here. Now, there have been many slides so far to show you these challenges. And I just want to reiterate that when we started in 2011, and this is not long ago, and again, we had a kind of a basis from the 2002, group of scientists that were going to be that were listed in the Convention on Biological Diversity, you know, the International Initiative on Soil Biodiversity. But we really kind of wanted to move faster and really address these urgent challenges. And now it's nice to see that we're all convening. But here you see these big issues. We could take water, food, biodiversity, human health. All of these have now become missions from, as I showed, from this new report from the International Science Council saying that research must be looked at like a mission to make our planet better. And soil biodiversity is part, right in the center where we see the Global Soil Partnership. It's really integral to getting all of these issues addressed. So, young scientists, here's your chance. What we wanted to do basically is just bring science of soil biodiversity to the table, whether it is biogeochemistry, whether it is above ground, looking at below ground, all the interactions we wanted to bring to the table. We do this by linking with partners. It's already been mentioned how many partners are now available and interested in soil biodiversity, and we can do more together. It was mentioned by Luca about this early atlas, which was just fascinating to me. It wasn't a GSBI project per se. There were people involved in it, obviously, that knew different organisms. But this is a map of threats to soil biodiversity. And that is based on knowledge at that time. It's pretty effective. And from that, we had partnerships. The GSBI did, has already been mentioned, with this document, which has become both available for teachers. It is being used, it's being looked at by policymakers. It is now being brought up as a reference for talking about what each group of animals, it's got gorgeous pictures of what each group from microbes on up does, what their functions are, what are the ecosystem services. But this scientific assessment that was recently done in 2020 is probably one of the most important things. I'm going to try to I can't get that off. The next was that we also connect soil biodiversities in global meetings. This is just an example of the number of partners that were involved in our first meeting that was held in Dijon, France, in about 2015. I think. And one of the questions we asked the participants, and you can see there were about 700 participants, was what do we need to be doing? And right now, the things that we've just heard that have taken, you know, years to get into policy, and now we need to do it, are methods harmonization, an assessment such as the status on soil biodiversity, the scientific links to policy, providing that knowledge so they can move forward, credible knowledge, convening with each other so that we can cross these disciplines, and just serving as a forum for new global networks. And there are many of them that are coming up and already running. The next meeting we will convene will be in Dublin. It's in March of 2023. We're looking forward to seeing many stakeholders there because, as Ronald mentioned, we have to be together on this. We also connect through this monthly blog, and I just want to give you another example of the type of topics that we do talk, and we're interested in hearing more topics from you all and people who are interested in talking. I wanted to show that some of the advances here, these are graphs from 1992 to October 2021. And on almost every single item that we have here, you see the numbers of papers going up, the numbers of items published went up. So we have had an impact here with a broader awareness among the scientific community that there is life in the soil. We need to consider all the soil and its above ground interactions. So what's next? I love this picture of all the organisms. That's from the atlas, so you all should get one. What's next? Well, this outcome document has been mentioned, and it lists 7 things that need to be done. And we're concentrating on number one, but many of these are being done, as mentioned, by the international network, the GLOSOB, and all of us are involved. And for today, we're going to be talking about this Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory, but I want to not limit this discussion in any way. For example, this shows in a number of studies the focus of research for agriculture, forestry, environmental research, and ecology, and the depth of soil that has been studied, mostly at 30 centimeters only. And for subdisciplines, and this is from 420 papers, you can see that it's 30 centimeters or less. And so a new type of observatory is going to have to be thought about to probe what's below that 30 centimeters. And here's an example of one that's going to be at the University of Idaho. It's got lots of partners, but it's 3 meters deep. And they're going to take proposals to look at everything from global change scenarios and manipulate the plants above ground. It's quite fascinating. So we don't want to limit what's going on. We need to link our soil biodiversity science to policy. There's many ways we need to act by providing science knowledge or integrating with other disciplines and scientific societies or whatever. Incorporating it has been mentioned into policy, the new framework for 2020. We have a position paper we wrote to the CBD for that. We need to work on those outcomes that I just mentioned and establish this observatory. But we want to not forget that there's an urgency and a reason for scientists to now come together, whether it's through mission-based science or just for soil biodiversity science to inform other science, and then the decisions that are going to be made on our lands. We need to not only think of ourselves, but think about the next generation of soil biodiversity researchers and how exciting the technology is now, from using artificial intelligence to look at through microscopes to provide the public with a better understanding of what we're seeing and why we're excited about the science. We're going to continue to partner. I think this is all very important, and it keeps GSBI busy. So with that, I'd just like to say that this picture from the Atlas is just one example of how the world's problems are really sitting at our level. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, for this introduction from the GSBI perspective. It's amazing that we have over 4,000 members already. So the last presentation will be by Carlos Guerra, and he will bring us to how to analyze soil biodiversity, and also he will bring us to Africa, or at least to outside the Northern Hemisphere. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wim, and thank you all for attending this panel. So it's not that I'm going to take you to outside the Northern Hemisphere, but I will try to focus a lot on some of the issues that we have been facing when trying to implement an actually global soil monitoring system that tries to be as balanced as possible across the world. First of all, I would like you to know where we come from. So the idea for us of implementing such a system implies that we look at soils not only from one perspective, but we try to understand soils in a multitude of perspectives. This involves including all the diversity inside soils, also the chemistry and the physics inside soils, but also the function within soils. But at the same time, to build a project like this, we need to, or we aim to create a project that is actually open for the participation of people, of researchers, but also open in the way that we want to communicate our science. The idea behind SoilBond is that you own your data, you own your soil sample, you are allowing us to use it in a more broader spectrum, but you are also allowed to use it yourself. So let's say that we want to you want to develop something in South America, for example, all the samples of SoilBond will be available to you. What this also means in order for this to be possible, is that we want full standardization. What this means in practice is that what we want people to contribute is actually soil, so soil samples that will be standardized and all pulled together in one single macro analysis that will touch all these aspects. In this scope, what we are now able to do already during this year, or we will be able to do this year, is that we will be able to sample in about 81 countries that will send us samples of soil, and then we will try to do all these analyses in a standardized way. This implies one thing that is very critical, because when doing this type of sampling, where this level of standardization enters into play, we have to comply with international law. And while for many of us as researchers, this compliance with law is something that we never touch or we never think about, it actually matters. And there are some countries where this matters a lot. You can go to jail, you can have your career damaged if you don't follow the law. So because of that, we want to protect everyone involved here. And this is a critical aspect for us to be Nagoya compliant and be compliant with international and local laws. At the same time, this is also a mechanism that stops much of our research, because we focus on nature conservation, nature protection, and try to have more sustainable soils. But this type of legal instruments, although probably necessary, they in many cases stop our capacity to do more broad research. As I was saying before, we are trying to look at soils from a very complementary point of view. But this implies that this is not a work for one institution only. Contrary to, for example, the first example that Luca presented, where the JRC is the main force behind the Lucas program in Europe and the European Soil Observatory, although it has partnerships with our institutions too. In SoilBond, we are built based on partnerships, because otherwise this would not be a possibility for us. And this implies having partnerships, or different partnerships, for addressing functional properties of soils, to addressing physical and chemical properties of soils, to address the diversity of soils. And just touching on one of the questions that I saw in the chat already about taxonomy and the use of taxonomy in these types of things. So as you can see here, we are also aiming to, for example, do organism extraction within soil samples. And this assumes that we have a network of taxonomists, a local network of taxonomists, because if it is already hard to ship samples from, I don't know, Brazil or from Angola to Europe, and to do this standardization in terms of analysis, imagine what it would be if we were starting to sample or to ship actual animals. And for that, so considering that impossibility, we are in the process of building a network of taxonomists, so to have them also participate in this type of global network and global sampling scheme. At the same time, as I was saying before, we have to have a very clear way of communicating how you interact with this type of network. Interacting with this type of network, this is not about citizen science. Although we work as volunteers, we are not looking for the average person to directly contribute to this, just because we have to overcome severe, in some cases very easy, legal issues in order to be able to actually sample in all these countries at the same time. So we have we laid out a very structured way of how to overcome all these issues, and we are, for example, in that way informing directly the efforts of FAO in trying to keep up with the current laws and the different national mechanisms that exist. Talking about what Wim was saying about bringing these questions to the Southern Hemisphere, I would like to come to this, I would like to come to this because I feel that we are when we are developing these networks, these global networks, we keep missing the point, and myself included. So when we started all of this, there are several issues that we did not consider when structuring this network. What you see here in this slide on your left is, so in green, you see all the countries that participate already in Soil One. And you can see that in South America, you have most of South America represented. In the case of Africa, this is not the case. What we found through building up the network in the past almost 2 years is that researchers from different parts of the globe look at their participation into these networks in quite different ways, or they have different needs that actually block or stop completely their capacity to participate in these networks. In the case of South America, one thing that is clear to us is that issues about researcher mobility, so the capacity of researchers to go outside of their country to either do other types of research or to extend the scope of their research is something that is quite important for them. And the other thing is about strategic funding and partnerships. So institutional level types of partnerships that can strengthen their local networks in many cases, or their regional networks. In the case of Africa, these two things also are there and very present. But what does not stop a South American researcher to do things is direct funding. So although it's needed, I'm not saying that it's not needed, but from at least the examples that we have, in South America, the capacity of a researcher to go outside of their university to do a sampling scheme is not blocked by the fact that we are not paying anyone. In the case of Africa, to go 100 kilometers away from your city is actually something that in some cases can account for a 2-month salary of the person that we are contacting. So having in mind these different realities is critical when we want to implement something that is actually global and that we want it to be properly global. To do this, or to try to overcome some of these things, we are now trying to solidify our network by extending the capacity of not only sampling things, so not only sampling soils, but also to extend our capacity to reply to these needs across the world. So one of the things that we have invested in recent times is to create mechanisms that at least allow researchers to have some type of mobility across the world. So in this case, we are centering in Germany, but we are trying to work with other programs across the world also that allow researchers to go from one university or from one country to another. We are also investing in strategic funding partnerships. Here, the first one that you see here is GBIF, where we are working closely to have a partnership where we can support other institutions to mobilize their own soil biodiversity data and therefore contribute to the pool of data. But there's also other institutions that are already actively contributing to that. You already saw the GRC here today, also actively contributing to the development of these types of infrastructures. But we still are missing a component of direct funding. We are still missing a mechanism that allows researchers from Ghana, for example, from any other place in the world, to act not as contributors to a network, but as full partners. So to be at the same time contributing to the network, but benefiting from that network for their own goals and own careers. And this is, we are still missing at the moment. And here, for example, is where the network presented by Ronald and FAO can, I think, in my view, play a critical role in supporting all these communities, supporting all these people in actually providing direct funding, because the mechanisms more or less that exist, but they are not funneled for these types of things. And I think with a structure like this, we can actually implement something that can be truly global and not only represent parts of the world that are already used to contribute to these type of networks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. And you've made some very important points that we will discuss later on to flesh them out a bit further. So now I would like to see the presenters showing themselves, and then we can have a discussion. And already I see quite a lot of questions in the Q&A. And maybe one first burning question, and I will just give it to Ronald first. How can people join the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory? That was a question was asked by several of them.
Thank you, Wim. Well, the first thing to do is to join the International Network of Soil Biodiversity, the NetSOP. That's where they need to join. And of course, I can put here in the chat, if I'm allowed, I can put the email address to whom they should write, and then they can join this network, because this is the network that will be behind the implementation of the observatory.
So if you can't see the chat later on, then if you type NetSOP on a search engine, then you will get to a website where you have an email address.
Yes.
Ronald, go ahead and type that in, and we will put it into the answers.
Good, perfect. So, and the same applies to Carlos, because several people also asked you, how can we join SoilBond? How does it work?
So there are two, let's say, actually there are three mechanisms that you can use to engage with us. One is similar to the GSBI. So SoilBond is an initiative that is close together with the GSBI, and you can join by being, so you can join our, let's say, mailing list of GeoBond. This can be done either through the GSBI or through GeoBond. So GeoBond is the umbrella activity of SoilBond. I can put in the chat, or I can ask Monica to put in the chat the links to that. Another way that you can join SoilBond is by providing your own soil samples. Please bear in mind that it would be quite easy for us to get 5,000 samples from Europe or from the US. So we are not focusing on having 5,000 samples from Europe. We want a balanced approach across the world, and this means getting fewer samples from European countries and more samples from underrepresented regions. But if you are from one of these underrepresented regions, we would gladly accept your contribution. A third way that you can join SoilBond is as an active lab. So if one thing that I didn't mention is that for all the samples that we receive, here in Germany, we actually process them, but then we send the soil samples to specific labs that do one analysis in all the samples to ensure standardization. So if you want to contribute in that way, you can also contribute in that way by accepting and doing the same analysis for all the samples that we get.
So Luca, I also saw a question about the language that we use. So this is in English, and actually I should have given the question to Ronald, because he speaks in Spanish. But there was a question. So is there also information in Spanish or other languages, Chinese? So how far are we there?
If you ask me, I can only say, as European Union, of course, all languages of the European Union are equally important. And so actually, for example, we just finished, you can now download the EU soil strategy in all languages of the EU. But of course, when we have this type of webinars or any informal meetings, we use English because, let's say, this is the language, the only language we can use that makes sure that most of our participants can follow and can be with us. But certainly, Spanish is a very important language, and I'm sure that Ronald can tell you more. And I'm always advocating that we should have the possibility to have this type of discussions also in other languages. I think it's very important. The only thing I would like to recall here that language is also shaping the way you address an issue. because coming back to the taxonomy question, as you call something makes a difference in how you deal with it. Just to tell you, I'm Italian, and you can use in Italian the word soil equally also to describe what in English is called land. So this distinction between land and soil, that is always something to be clarified when you speak English. In other languages, language groups, is less sensitive because actually you use the same word. So there is, you know, how you approach things is very much depending on the language you use. So I have a lot of sympathy in trying to have this type of webinars and this type of meetings also in other languages. By the way, languages that are quite largely used globally. I mean, Spanish, but also other language groups are very important. So I'm very much in favor of that. But Ronald can tell you much more because he works at global scale, and I think UN has a large experience in dealing with the language issue.
So Ronald, how are you doing this?
Well, thanks, Wim. Basically, all the work we do, we have to translate it into the 6 official UN languages. So we are doing all our efforts to have them in this, so the websites, but the documents, etc. And the meetings we organize also should be in the 6 languages, right, with interpretation. But of course, there is demand for other languages because they said, why only those 6? So, okay, politics are behind, but whenever there is a demand, we try to make an effort and have also the knowledge translated in the languages that we are requested, like Portuguese, for instance, etc. So every time, of course, there is more and more demands for trying to allow people to access all this in their own languages, and I think we should make an effort.
Okay, so it's also nice to tell. So maybe for Andres Maria Ramirez, who asked this question. No, that was not a question. Sorry, that was someone else asking the question. That you can also show a personal initiative. So maybe you can sort of help translating or find people who can help translating information that we have or abstracts or so into the local language. And having said this, there are several colleagues in China, Li Qi and Junling Zhang. They have formed a group of colleagues who have helped to set over the Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas into Chinese. And so there's a lot of bottom-up activities possible there. So speak out and you will be heard, and hopefully you can help. About something else, Diana, so Rudiger Schmelz asked a question about taxonomy. So
wait, Wim, could we go to, Carlos had his hand up about the previous question. Can we go to him?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was looking at the question. Carlos, yeah.
No worries. No, I would like to add that the question of language that Luca was mentioning is more important than one may see it in the beginning. Our Soil meetings we have Soil meetings in 4 languages because of that. We have it in English, in Portuguese, in Spanish, and in Chinese. The reason for this is that we have people that speak all of these 4 languages, not because we selected these ones. But it's important because the interpretation that we do, not only about the word soil, like Luca was saying, but also about what it means to participate in something and what it means to contribute and what are your own rights in this type of network. These also vary according to the language. So to have everything very clear to everyone, sometimes it's important either through interpretation, like the FAO is the ability to do, or because we have the capacity to do it, it's important to go beyond English.
And I would just like to add on that, you know, it also affects what the GSBI does with its blogs, with its with this webinar, for example, and the topics. We realize that a lot of the timings and the topics are all Northern Hemisphere or, you know, Europe or USA because we're organizing from there. But part of it is also that we don't know the people who would volunteer from various countries in the Southern Hemisphere to help us either with translation or tell us what is a problem there that they see more major than we see. or just an aspect of ecology. And so, you know, it would perhaps be very useful to have a GSBI webinar that is not necessarily with me, who can only speak English, but is done in Spanish so people can understand about the Global Observatory, and have Luca and Ronald and Carlos, who all speak Spanish, I think, along with somebody else who could speak Spanish and talk about just the GSBI or another topic. So I think, you know, we're limiting it ourselves because we're only a volunteer organization, and so we need ideas and people to step up.
So maybe we can conclude that FAO is just the most multilingual organization, but also for GSBI, if people from South America or Central America want to have more information in Spanish or Castellano or in Portuguese or so, then perhaps we could have a group there that helps setting over information into the language, because that helps a lot. Maybe just a little bit teasing, but in English, or maybe American English, then soil is called dirt. So couldn't we have a petition against using the word dirt for soil? Because Dirt, the movie, I still remember.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, you don't have to answer that, Diana.
I'm
Maybe
not-
the next question is nice for you, because Rudiger Schmelz asked about taxonomy, and he actually posed a question to Luca, but I think he will elegantly give that to you anyway. So why not boost taxonomy more when we are going for a global soil biodiversity observatory network?
Well, I will just count in that I think that one of the things that we have said is, from our perspective, is we need more taxonomists with the molecular biologists to align the taxa. You know, what we've known previously with the species. There's a taxonomic impediment across plants all the way down to animals. And so that's one area. And we have had in the previous, like, it hasn't been in the past year with COVID or anything like that. We haven't been able to push that as much as we can, but we will we will welcome volunteers who want to work on this issue more. I think it is also written into some of the reports that we've all been involved in, whether it was the atlas or the status assessment that FAO organized, Ronald organized, that we really need the new generation and educated taxonomist as well as biogeochemist and whatever. So we have tried to push it. It's just, we would love some volunteers to work on that as a working group even further.
So this is a loud and open request for volunteers. Well, we are all volunteers actually, but so just announce yourself, and then, you know, the work is there, so we can just start doing it.
Whether you're entomologist or zoologist, and we all know that, you know, different types of, and this is one of the things we're working out within Soilbon and other observatories, is what are the methods? How can you have harmonization of methods when you've got an earthworm that's this big and a nematode that's this big? They're not the same methods that have to be harmonized. And so there's some looking at that. How are faster ways to identify them using image analysis? Then how do you get them verified? Do you have verified genomic organisms that you can match to that? We don't know the numbers of species in soils. We don't even know the numbers of species very much in the top 30 centimeters across a meter of soil in many places. So I totally agree that this is a huge, the taxonomic impediment is huge, and we encourage capacity building in that particular area, as well as not letting some of this expertise that is retiring go away. And then I'll throw it to Luca and Ronald, if that's okay, just to see if they've got some other points of view.
Luca, Ronald, going molecular.
Going
Maybe I can.
just morphology.
I think you both look a bit puzzled. So maybe Michael Bolkowski his question: are there efforts to join forces with the ERGA initiative, the European Reference Genome Atlas? Carlos, can you just give this a a step?
Yes, but I think the Luca would be able, at least for Europe, Luca would be able to answer that better. We, at global scale, we are trying to join forces with everyone in eyeball and in other initiatives that deal directly with DNA mapping, let's put it like this. But in the case of Europe, I don't have any ideas. Maybe Luca can say something to it.
Ronald, I see you. Luca, whoever wants to.
Okay.
As I was mentioning in my presentation, we committed to present in this year, in 2022, an assessment of a new assessment of soil biodiversity in EU based on our new data that we collected through the LUCAS network. You know, LUCAS, for the ones who are not familiar, is a soil monitoring network that we run across the 27 EU member states, where we collect soil samples on a regular basis and where also we do some DNA sequencing and metagenomic analysis that allows us to have now an overview of the genes that you can find in soil samples across Europe. And we are currently finalizing that report that we plan to release in this year. If you are interested to follow this, please keep in touch with our European Soil Data Center website, where all the data will be made available, and also the report, of course. But certainly that's for us a big investment and a very important new knowledge base on soil biodiversity in the EU.
So Ronald, how are you handling this in GLOSOB? And
I think, look, we have a global perspective on this, and of course, we are very supportive of technological developments and innovation, because that is the future, and we should really pursue it. However, I want to bring some important aspect that, yes, for us, the European Union is an example in terms of all the soil activities that are taking place currently. But we also need to look to the other side, the developing world. And one important aspect that we want to bring is that there is, of course, inequalities in terms of the use of technology. And even there are countries that they don't, or laboratories that they don't even measure anything related to biological properties, okay? So what we want to pursue is that through the GLOSOB, we want to really raise the capacities. Capacity development should be very important, and not only about the training of people, but also equipment. So look, we need to ensure that at least all countries in the world, also laboratories in the world, are able to measure soil biological properties, okay? Now, the best will be if all could get this new era of DNA analysis, etc. But let's start on bringing them at least to one standard approach where they can be able to measure themselves some soil biological properties with standard methodologies and tools. I think that should be our medium-term objective. And then, of course, as technology moves forward, and so we can go to that level. But at least let's get all at the same point. And really, capacity development is fundamental. And I understand that we should try to get information for all the world. But let's don't forget, we should strengthen the capacities of countries. Otherwise, they will be always dependent on someone else getting the information for them. And I don't think that is really something we should support. Both approaches are fine, but we should really aim to get them at the same level with all.
yeah. So I see from Michael Bukowski that half of the organisms currently fully sequenced in ERGA are soil organisms, so that's a good sign. But George Brown says that the taxonomy capacity building question, that CBD has a global taxonomy initiative, but there's little focus on soil biota. So there's really something where we have to spread out and to make soil biodiversity and the capacity to analyze that, and then to bring that in the databases So that is all needs to be done from various perspectives.
Hey, Wim, I think Carlos had a comment on the last question.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Ronald was saying. So in the past year or so, my work, although this is volunteer, but my work has been giving conferences in different languages, as we were speaking before, to address one of the issues about training. So it's not only about the training on how to extract the data, it's also about the training about how to use the data and how to do the assessments that we then want to do at global scale. And I cannot be more in agreement with Ronald. That is what Ronald just mentioned, is the actual bottleneck of all these things. We can have the European Commission, for example, funding, and we need the European Commission to fund all these initiatives. But if we cannot transfer all these mechanisms to the country unit, that the countries can start developing their own mechanisms to sample and analyze soil biodiversity, this will not get anywhere. One of the examples that we have in SoilBond, and it's not only about countries developing these mechanisms, is also about gender equality, because, for example, fortunately, SoilBond is more or less half-half in terms of women involvement and men involvement, but this is not the case in most of the community. And one of the examples I would like to highlight is in Uruguay, where a group of all female researchers are using the model of SoilBond to develop their own national project or their own national ideas. And this is one example of what I hope to be many in the future, that people can start using our materials and our structure to develop their own projects nationally, and we can build these national networks.
So I'm looking through the questions, and the fact that I don't see you, Carlos, is that you're in the left upper corner. So I know. I should just pay more attention to your hand waving. So, but so how is this going to look like if all these observatory or soil biodiversity initiatives, if they're running? Are we then moving towards that people can do the analysis locally, or are soil samples going to be sent to a central place as the other extreme and then analyzed there with the same techniques? So Carlos maybe first and Ronald then. So how is this going to work in the future?
So because you are using the word in the future,
now,
but so there's a difference, I think, between what we can do now and what we hope to do in the future. Right now, I think the two main mechanisms that we can implement already is one is about capacity building, as Ronald was mentioning, but capacity building not only about training, but also about equipment and trying to implement a scheme that allows others to do the same assessments that we are doing at different scales and in Europe or in other places in their own countries. This is one mechanism that has to be really a strength. And the other mechanism that we can initially at least already implement is what SoilBond is doing, that is to have a centralized mechanism of collecting the samples and giving the data away to the people that contributed their samples. This is what I think we can do now. What I hope we can do in the future together with FAO is to bring this same mechanism to the different countries in different scales, probably in different ways. I'm not saying it's not the case, but bring the same mechanism to all the countries or to the most countries that we can, in order to have them develop either to their own country or at least regionally, because in some cases, like in Europe, we have regional agreements that allow for that. So either at the country level or at regional level, to have different patches or to build a global patchwork of this monitoring system.
Before we go to Ronald, there was a paper by Kelly Ramirez and Francisco de Vries who led this consortium, and they actually showed that if you look at molecular information on soil microbes, that the strongest discriminating factor was the one who analyzed the data. How are we going to handle that? How are we going to deal with that?
So because we cannot deal with that at the moment, that's why we are doing this standardized effect. So we are going to the other extreme, as you mentioned, Wim, that is to have all the samples treated by one, even by one institution, and in some cases by the same technician, to have all the samples treated equally. But we cannot underplay what Ronald was saying before. We cannot make countries, especially in the developing world, dependent on the capacity of other countries to be able to do their own analysis. So I think we have to really work on trying to either by having more statistical methods to include all of these samples, or to have other processes that allow us to collect data from different sources and to put them all together into one single block.
Yeah. So Ronald, so what's your perspective on this? And also, if you bring in the Kyoto Protocol with about exchange of biological material, and so how are you dealing with that?
Well,
Sorry, the Nagoya Protocol, I mixed up too.
yes. Well, let me start first with the main point that was referring about how this will look like in the future. Okay. Look, we have been working on the establishment of a global soil information system, okay? Because what we want is that whenever you want to see the state of your soils, there is a place where you can visit. But of course, that depends on the scale and the resolution. But this system is fed by countries, okay? So really, our main objective is that every country is able to have a national soil information system that includes the monitoring capacities, because soil is a dynamic body, right? And soil biodiversity should be part of it. So the idea is that really we, through this network and these collaborations, we are able to develop standard operating procedures, protocols, etc., not only for measuring, but also for mapping, etc., so that then through advocacy, we will try to ask countries to invest on this, so that then they can build up this information at national level. And then we are able to have the global picture, because all countries will be doing so. It sounds like a dream, but I'm sure we will be able to do it, because there is every time more and more conscious on this aspect. And that should be the approach, and the observatory has that aim, okay? Developing capacities, strengthening them, empowering them. And I was reading one of the comments, how companies, how those that are producing the equipment can be part. They can be part, because we need to.
I think it freezes.
But also we have the tools and the means to do it. And then the countries, the governments are the ones to invest on these activities and support the institutions. So that is really where we would like to reach with all these activities. And that's why networks, and like we have here, all these expertise, are the ones who need to be helping us to transfer this knowledge and skills to other countries. So that's how we see. Now, the transfer of material, look, we are already working on something like this. And indeed, today we have been already packaging soil samples that we are distributing to all countries in the world, to all laboratories, for the proficiency testing, okay? So we have already agreed in FAO with countries on these procedures and exchange of samples. But it is not, the objective is not for them to send us back the data and information. No, the objective is that we try to see how they are doing in terms of laboratory performance, so that we see if they need training, if they need to address the equipment part, etc. So things are working and they are moving, and I think we are in a really good opportunity, unique opportunity for all these aspects that we are talking about. So I really hope we will materialize it.
Yeah, that would be really good. We also had this in the past, this Wageningen soil sample ring analysis, that soil samples were sent around, and then you got the data back, and you could see where your own analysis were, and nothing bad or good about it, but you could just sort of calibrate yourself. So I would like to switch to Luca and then to Diana about how, if this all works, and also if all these data are sort of getting somewhere, and Paul Henning Koch also mentioned that you also have GBIF, and so that in the ideal world that we get all these data, that we have linked it together, and then how are we going to make sure that policy can do something with this? Because Luca mentioned something like indicators, and I think this is always a very touchy word, because we, after so many years of looking for indicators, we haven't found them yet. So Luca, what indicators are policymakers looking for? And then maybe later on to Diana, so how can we get some progress on working on indicators? So how to make this work for policy?
Well, it can only work if you have a policy, because indicators are meaningful only if they are indicating in which direction a certain policy implementation is going. But first you need to have a policy. Just to make an example, if you have a climate change policy and your indicator is, I don't know, CO2 in the atmosphere, this is telling you something in which direction we are doing. Now, if you go to soils, you need to have a soil policy in order to develop then the indicator framework that will help us or you to see if that policy is going in the right direction or not. For the EU, this is our, as I said, our new EU soil strategy, which will be then complemented this year. Actually, next year we will present it, but this year it will be developed by a binding legal instrument, which is a soil health law. Of course, once we have a soil health law in place in the EU, then there will be an indicator system being attached to it that will allow us to monitor if this law is properly implemented and if it has a positive or negative impact on what we want to achieve, which is sustainable soil management. Now, a global soil biodiversity observatory, of course, needs to be attached to a global soil biodiversity policy. Do we have it? Not to my knowledge, but of course, Ronald can tell you much more about that. I think it's needed to have a global soil policy. We have had many meetings discussing this. Actually, the Global Soil Partnership should take initiative in this direction. But of course, this is in the hands of the national governments if they want to have a global legal instrument addressing sustainable soil management. But without a policy, an indicator system is not very meaningful, because you don't know indicating on what. So, of course, if by chance in the next CBD, or the Convention for Biodiversity, we may have any decision concerning soil biodiversity, then eventually you can attach to that an indicator system on soil biodiversity. But this type of negotiation is not currently happening as far as I know, but Ronald may know more about that. So in conclusion, an indicator system needs to have a policy to monitor, otherwise it's not very helpful.
So before then moving to Diana, Ronald, so national policies, regional policies, global policies, how do we move forward?
Well, that's a very important question, and of course, Luca already provided information about. Listen, of course, if we compare what's happening around the world, the EU as a regional body is, let's say, taking the lead on having policies and having the reporting systems, etc. Okay, we hope there will be EU regions all around the world so that we have all these regional perspectives covered and the actions as well. But when it comes to the global situation, what we try is, of course, to develop global policies, but not given that we are the UN and we cannot force anyone to do things. We have voluntary normative tools that try to give you the umbrella for developing and adopting your own policies. So for instance, we have the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management, where if a government wants to really care about their soils, they can build their national legal framework and policy, and then the actions and the monitoring system, right? Because the elements are there. So we try to advocate through tools like this, or the code for fertilizers, how to use them, etc. Now, in the case of soil biodiversity, we are working with the Convention on Biological Diversity, but there is always one question, because currently the post-2020 framework is exactly trying to address what are the commitments countries will do in order to preserve biodiversity, and we are trying to include soil biodiversity there. And the policies, of course, are guiding. But then one question is always there, and Luca is right. You need an indicator system when there is a policy, but now in the negotiations that are currently taking place, they are asking you first for the indicators to be used. And if you don't have data and information for that, then they don't want to put the commitment, because they say, how we are going to monitor implementation if we don't have that in place. So it is like the chicken and the egg, but we are pushing for having something on soil biodiversity as a commitment from countries in terms of policy. And then, of course, advocacy should go in order for them to land that global commitment into a national policy. But I can say that many countries are taking that challenge, and I hope it will, but all I hope should mirror what the EU does.
Diana, could you take this further? Yeah, you have to unmute it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
So let's give you some, I would say meat, but I would say some soil organisms to bite in. So what if we would not be able to come up with indicators for soil biodiversity, for example, or indicators that can be of use for policy? Then,
Well, I think, you know, from what I know, on the indicators issue, there's and I'm sure a lot of people will fill me in, but there's everything from using soil carbon to represent all the soil biodiversity in the soil, which, you know, there's a disagreement about that. Then there's also the idea of using single indicators or single groups of organisms, say nematodes, to be indicators. And yet there's also more of a, to me, a more reasonable one, since we're talking about the whole soil food web, is to consider, you know, what are the functional groups you have in soil and the representations across the ranges of fauna and microbes. And that can be done now. I mean, it's, I think we saw at the European Soil Observatory, there was some example of somebody taking soil samples and then immediately going out and using molecular techniques. But that might only be for labs that have molecular techniques or have the funding for it. So there's not even with indicators, there is the amount of work that it takes to get those indicators, whether it's little amount of work or a lot of money to do that work, say in molecular analysis, and whether businesses will start up to do the DNA analysis so that they can pick the suite of indicators to tell the farmer, oh yeah, I know that you're going to build your soil here and your soil carbon and get your ecosystem services. So I think there's a lot of targets of ecosystem services. There's the economics of it, whether a small scale farmer can pay to get the indicators that a larger scale farmer can, and has the funding for. So I think there are a lot of issues embedded in indicators that people are looking at. And so they may have it for a region or for a climate or for a changing climate, but I don't know if they're going to have a specific global indicator that's a species or a group of species. It may be something that we have to go back to again. What would they do in countries that don't have access to the funding? And will governments support that? So there's different levels of what what indicators could do. That's my 2 cents.
So Paul Henning Kroch mentioned a paper by Antonio Bispo
Mhm.
for indicators. I think so that's nice to look at, but yeah, I think this indicator issue still is sort of a little bit like this, the stone around our neck, because you know it's not as easy as for humans. If you just take a thermometer and then if you're over 39 degrees centigrade, then you know it's getting pretty rough. Then if it's over 40, then it's getting scary. But we don't have such a thing for soils. So
Well, I think there are things that we've discussed in the sustainable soil document that came from Ronald's FAO. There are lots of discussions of using something like measuring CO2 and what's the variability of it in wet soils versus dry soils and whether it's accurate. And I think that's something that, again, we can use, but we just got to know what are the parameters on that particular indicator or thermometer. When is it off by a couple of degrees? Because you're making serious decisions here on are we really regenerating soils, and how many years will it take? So,
so Carlos, when would you be happy?
That's a hard question. Before I answer that, I would like just to say that what Luca was saying, that an indicator or whatever we do without a target or a policy is nothing, is because we can have, if we look on the literature right now, we will find hundreds of elements with the name indicator attached to it that we could use to indicate many, many things. Diana pointed out several of these things that we may want to indicate, but if you don't have any normative instrument behind it, we will not be able to use it, I would say. But so considering that we have something, so this is one of the sides of the indicators. And for example, in the case of the EU, for example, currently we are trying to explore without the law that Luca mentioned already. We already have several other mechanisms, for example, on ecosystem restoration that we can address directly with specific indicators for that specifically. So I would like the audience to open their view, not only to look at soils per se, so for, let's say, for farming, but there are other policies out there, conservation, restoration, land degradation, other policies that are already implemented that would benefit from indicators on soils. The other side of this coin is to how to feed these indicators. And here, the work of GBIF, for example, in the case of biodiversity, is actually very critical because without us mobilizing the wealth of data that hundreds of taxonomists, hundreds of soil ecologists have already produced, but maybe have not shared with the world, without that work, without that mechanism, we will always be lost because we will only trust on the formal mechanisms of gathering information. And I don't think that would be enough, at least for what we have at the moment.
And an earlier comment that you made is interesting because you mentioned other policies. So question for Luca. So when we were writing this ESAC report, the 2018 report, there was not an approved soil. I know you still were quite disappointed that we don't have a soil law in Europe, and then we try to put soil under different aspects as food and nature, biodiversity conservation and climate change. And so Carlos mentioned something which went a bit into that direction. So how are you looking at this now? Is it good to have something for soil specifically, or can we wrap soil in other policies?
I think the situation now is very different because a new term became the term to be used in any soil discussion, and this is soil health. Okay, I remember that term was not on the table when we were discussing previous times the strategy. Soil health has emerged as some central concept to anything we are doing now. Now, the big question is, what is a healthy soil? and particularly what is a healthy soil ecosystem or a healthy soil habitat, if I can call it, or whatever. So you see, so there comes in the indicator issue, because indeed, how can we define a healthy soil? So how can we say that a healthy soil means that it has a healthy, well-functioning ecosystem or a well-functioning biodiversity pool? And of course, a healthy soil means also healthy food, and healthy food means healthy people. So there is here all an nexus that can be elaborated. So I think that's the key question that we will have to address this year in preparation of what I was just mentioning, the soil health law, it's called, what we want to do. So, and I think biodiversity, soil biodiversity is central to that, because a healthy soil, in my view, should be a soil that is alive, a soil that has a rich biodiversity, a soil that has a well-functioning ecosystem that is delivering ecosystem services, that it's what we at the very end want to protect. So how to define that? It's still an open question, I must say. We are still struggling with that. We have a number of working groups established to look into that. I think if we could have some indication also from the community dealing with soil biodiversity, which is what we are doing in this webinar, that would be great. If we really could have a concept of what is a healthy soil and what is a healthy soil ecosystem and a well-functioning biodiversity pool in a healthy soil. So that's I don't know if it's addressing your question, but that's the central discussion we have now. Personally, if you want my personal opinion, is that you cannot address this without going local. I don't believe you can have a solution that fits everywhere. It's not possible in the EU, and even less, I would say, at global scale. You need to go local, and that's why I think what we are establishing now within the soil mission, I don't know if you're aware, but we have a mission on soils called Soil Deal for Europe, is this concept of living labs and lighthouses. So having local action in a community together with scientists, together with stakeholders, together with the actual actors. And I saw some of the comments from the chat go in that direction, involving local farmers and their knowledge, involving local activists and their knowledge. If you have such a system at local scale, maybe then you can come up with a solution that will be fitting well at that scale. But if all this then comes together, it may provide a solution also then at national, EU, and even maybe global scale. So,
yeah, so recently
I don't believe you can address soils without going into the local then.
Yeah, so recently we had a meeting with between EU and Canada, and there was also a lot of interest in Canada for setting up lighthouse farms or long-term ecological research sites or so. So in the Netherlands, you know, the Netherlands is a very small country. You only see it as a point of a needle on the map of the globe. But I once put together, so we have living labs, we have lighthouse farms, we have field labs, we have well, some long-term ecological research sites. There's a lot of these things. The problem is, if you plot them on the map, they're all on a different position. So there's not one place where you have all together. And this could, so for Ronald, this could globally also become a nightmare if everything is there, but at a different position. So how can we make sure that we sort of get sort of hotspots? And someone mentioned a hotspot for soil biodiversity, I think in India, but so how can we define where to position these observatories or these lighthouse farms or whatever?
Well, I believe that definitely, if I recall what I said before, that we are trying to empower countries to do the work, because that is what really happens. That means a decentralized approach, because yes, we want to have the global picture of everything, but we don't want to do it top down anymore. Instead, we want to go the other way around. And that's where you really, at the country level, needs to capture all the local variability. And when talking about for instance, the observatory, what we are aiming to is to have a short, and medium, and long-term approach. in the short term, of course, we would like to start measuring something. And for this, we will try to get hotspots where we would like to have these measurements taking place. But in the long run, of course, we would like that countries get the ownership of that process and measurement, so that then they will be populating the key places with the most biodiversity. Now, it is, look, the soil science community, of course, is a very important player in all this. But when talking about them with different perspectives, it's quite difficult to get some agreement. And the indicator thing can take you for years, and I'm sure maybe we will never reach agreement. We reach agreement in FAO with 3 indicators to start with, but still, I can tell you that when you talk about laboratories, the only thing that all agreed is that the pH, when soil pH is 7, is neutral. All the rest is very difficult that you get any agreement, even reference values to guide us, like you get some reference values when you do the blood test for humans, right? Some indications. But from soil science, it's quite difficult because you always have the local variability in place. So sooner or later, we need to come with some indicators that will help us to enter into this global definition of policies, because otherwise we are out. One example is the Sustainable Development Goals. We fight a lot of time and we advocate for having soils more reflected. And the usual question was that the statistics, national statistics systems, were not having almost anything on soils, meaning that we were out. So we were not able to put policies or let's say any goal there, because we don't have the tools to measure and show progress. So sooner or later, we need to take a commitment, a compromise, and have something reflecting how soils can be considered.
Exactly. And Ed Bourgeois also mentioned that there are 5 principles of soil health. Yeah, I think that the group here is quite aware of the principles. Ultimately, it comes down to how to apply the principles in policy and in management. So we have 12 minutes left. So I would like to ask each of you, where are we in 5 years from now? I will start with Diana. Where are we in 5 years from now? You have to unmute.
Sorry. I think this has been absolutely fascinating, because I'd like to, I'm optimistic at heart, and I'd like to say that I would hope that we do have some resolution on a global observatory, and perhaps the different types of laboratories in countries that would give us the information to include biodiversity in soils as part of overall biodiversity. Because I think to meet these global challenges, we need some measures that we can use, very much like we use birds or snakes or bumblebees. We need the same kind of indicators below ground, because it's not a blocked off piece of concrete. It's living and it interacts above ground. And if we're seeing all these global problems above ground, we as a community of scientists have to do as somebody mentioned, the magic word of compromise, which in policy can take years, but I think we have to be more urgent. So I would add 5 years from now, we scientists should come to an agreement with stakeholders about what some of these markers are that we need. I think the other thing that's really important is to go back to this topic that we talked about in building capacity in various areas of soil biodiversity. Again, I want to say we have lots of disciplines involved, people who are entomologists, nematologists, work only in the Arctic or work only in the desert. Many, they're not aware of necessarily all the policies that have to do with soil, but those disciplines need to talk and come together on where they think our contributions will help in training the future people working in biodiversity, that soil biodiversity becomes more noted. I think that's really important, a long-term thing. And then I think more interaction of the scientists with the policymakers is really where it's all at. If the scientists sit back and say, oh, they can argue about this, I don't want to contribute, then we're dead. So.
Okay, Luca, where are we in 5 years from now?
That's difficult to say. I can tell you what I hope we will be in 5 years from now. And I can tell you, I'm pretty confident that in 5 years from now, in the EU, we will have a binding legal agreement, which will be the soil health law. That for me would be a major breakthrough. For the simple reason, as Ronald was saying, that the EU is somehow setting often the example. And if we achieve that for 7 countries, we can achieve that maybe also for the 100 and more countries that are members of FAO. Because advocating that soil health is something that goes beyond the national borders is something that is very difficult to explain to policymakers. But if we succeed in that, that will be a major breakthrough. And I'm confident this time it could go better than the last time. At global scale, I can only hope that this Global Soil Observatory will be operational in 5 years' time, and that it will be participatory. I mean, that's what I think it's really what I think is crucial. And participatory means not doing metagenomics and high-tech, super fancy observations like we do in the EU. Participatory means what to me, for example, something like the Warm Watch program in Canada. I don't know if you're familiar with that. To me, that was fascinating. A school kids-based program across all Canada where school kids were going out in the field and counting earthworms. This type of things, which seem maybe not so scientific and a little bit trivial to many of us, I think would make a difference, because doing that type of things when you are a kid brings you close to soil, brings you close to soil biodiversity. And these are the things I would advocate the Global Soil Biodiversity Observatory should strive for. So simple testing that can be done by everybody in the field at global scale. That would be a major breakthrough. Very simple things, counting earthworms or whatever. And that thing FAO can do because it doesn't require huge financial efforts. And I think we are counting very much on the Global Soil Partnership to take this up and take the lead on that. Thank you.
Nice. Ronald.
Well, I'm very optimistic because well, I believe that soils didn't get much attention as they are currently getting. So this is the basis, and I'm confident that all colleagues working on soils, like all of that are present here today, are working hard in order to really materialize all this soil fashion that we have now. So in 5 years, I see, and I can tell you that we will have the Global Soil Observatory, Soil Biodiversity Observatory running. And of course, as Lucas said, the participatory approach is fundamental, and that's why we are really facilitating this. And we want to have ideas from all of you, like this one that Luca mentioned, in order to really have this observatory running and let's say having ownership by all. That is something very important, because otherwise an observatory by few will not work. I also see that in 5 years' time, we are working towards something to have some soil binding mechanism. So we are working towards the institutionalization of the Global Soil Partnership so that it becomes something binding. I hope it will fly. I think there is quite good support, but also we are building our own framework, action framework for the next 10 years. And in there, you will see that it's quite ambitious. And I'm sure that in 5 years' time, we will have at least half of the policymakers on board in supporting something like this commitment. So I see that in 5 years, soils will be having the attention, this attention materialize in concrete commitments. So I really hope I will not be mistaken, but let's see in 5 years, hopefully, if we all are here. Thank you.
And the last word is for Carlos. You're the younger one here, Carlos. So what is,
Yeah.
you may say 10 years, but 5 years to start with.
I can say also 5 years. And I want to start by saying that Ronald was saying that the dream was, and then he said something. Because I'm younger, because I'm more naive, I really believe in the dream. And I really believe in the capacity of people and of us here and other people across the world to implement this in a real way. So for me, in 5 years' time, I would like to have temporal analysis of soil biodiversity. We will get that already in the EU, but this would be an achievement, for example, for Soil One. Within Soil One, we aim also for that, and this would be something to consider. This would be a very important outcome for me in 5 years. Then I would like to have more and better representation of the developing world, to overcome some of the barriers that we have at the moment, to, for example, with the support of the JRC or from FAO, to provide, for example, direct funding for developing countries that they can also interact directly with us and provide their own contributions, their own knowledge and expertise to this type of questions. Then a very objective thing, I would like to have 5, apart from the EU and the US and Canada, I would like to have 5 national soil biodiversity monitoring systems implemented. And if we can have that at a startup, this would be already an achievement for me. And finally, I would like to have, at least within Soil One is not a project of me and Diana. It's a project of more than 500 people. And these 500 people have 500 different ideas of what they can do and what they want to do with this type of information. So in 5 years' time, I don't want to have 500 different ideas, but I would like to have 20% of those people developing their own ideas and developing their own projects under the scope of Soil One. And that would be me. Thank you.
That's super. Yeah, this latter point also touches to something that I would like to say is we are really good in as soil ecologists or scientists in general to show that every time we make a finding that it is a novel finding, and that's also the way you get into the higher impact journals and so all novel things. But this gives a very scattered perspective of our work. And so what I hope that in 5 years from now that we sort of towards the outer world show that we agree on certain things. And so within the field, we might say, okay, we disagree or so, but towards the outer world, we should come up with a message which is understandable and which is coherent. And I think we have that, but we are very much trained to show the differences and not to show this, the convergences. The other thing is that I hope that my country is not a country voting against the soil directive or a soil law in Europe. So we have lost one European country already voting against this law. But if I can do something to motivate the people in the Netherlands to vote for and not against, I will do that, Luca. And for the rest, I hope that we, in 5 years from now, we have this Soil Observatory network installed, and this and that this enables crosstalk between scientists and farmers and landowners, and that we will just have a more happy soils worldwide, because this is what we need. If we don't have them, then we have a problem to think about what will happen 100 years from now, because that might be the end of where we are. So with this positive message, I'm very positive about the future. I think it was really nice. Thanks a lot to you all to give us insights into how policy works, how international developments work, from how FAO plays a role, how the GSBI tries to be a grassroots organization to stimulate and to contact the scientists and to bring them in contact with the ones where the information is needed, and also to see how Carlos and colleagues and also with his network and other networks are working towards getting more knowledge up the table. So thanks a lot. It's 6:01 in the Netherlands. It should be 6:01 somewhere else in the world as well. And this is where we're going to stop. Thanks a lot for everybody. And have a good evening, night, morning, day. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.